Oh, good morning. Thank you so much for being here and for taking time out of your busy schedules. And for those of you that are watching on replay, thank you for watching the replay. I am really grateful you're here because I'm hoping that it means that you're keen to support your neurodivergent colleagues as best as possible, or perhaps it's for yourself to help yourself. But it is something that I'm very passionate about. Um, so you can see on the screen there's a QR code. If you've signed up already through my website and got the emails, you don't need to do this because you'll get the replay. But if you haven't and you want to make sure that you get the replay, and I've got some resources to send you as well afterwards, the QR code or what I've just put in the chat there, if you sign up through there, it'll make sure that you get the slides. That I've got a big kind of handout that goes alongside it and the replay link as well. So just to let you know if you want to do that. You can do. Just before we get started, just a reminder this session is being recorded and is going to be available for others to watch back. If you want to ask any questions anonymously, those of you that are joining live, feel free to just pop them in the chat and I won't say your names. But if you're happy to just speak, then I'm happy for you to just come off mute and talk. I don't want to, you to feel like you can't. But at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. If you feel more comfortable doing Q&A without the recording, then I'll make sure we've stopped the recording and then we can just have a chat. So we can talk about that at the end, just so that you all know, and hopefully that's all okay. So today we're going to be looking at what happens when neurodivergent employees seem to be performing brilliantly, but the way they're sustaining that performance comes at a cost. I'll be talking for about 25-30 minutes, and then there's time, as I said, at the end for Q&A. But please do ask any questions or interact in the chat as we go along. I might not see the chat straight away, especially if I'm in the middle of something. I have ADHD myself, just to give you that. I can be easily distracted, so I will try to not look at the chat until I've got to the end of my bit, but I will come back to it. So if it's really urgent, though, if you suddenly can't hear me or something like that, then just come off mute and give me a shout. But otherwise, I'll keep stopping regularly to look at what's in the chat. Hope that's all right. So, I'm Lauren Smythe. I work with individuals and organisations to help them understand and support neurodivergence in the workplace. And I'm not going to spend ages on this, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a few different perspectives that I bring to the work that I do. So professionally, I'm an ICF accredited coach, advanced ADHD coach. I'm currently also undertaking the advanced neurodiversity coaching certification so that I'm, expanding beyond just working with people with ADHD, also other neurotypes. So that's what I'm trained in. It's what I do for a living. It's a full-time job. Practically, I've worked in high pressure environments myself, so including corporate finance for my sins, and teaching. I taught business and economics for 7 years before I then went self-employed and started my own business about 11 years ago now. And then personally, I bring lived experience. So as I said, I have ADHD myself. I was late diagnosed age 41, so that was coming up for 4 years ago now. And I'm a parent to neurodivergent children. So this is my kind of personal life as well. This is what I've lived, at home, but also at work. And at work when I didn't realize I had ADHD, which is, a different perspective, but things that I wish I'd known. So from all those angles, I know what it can look like, from working with people, from having studied it, and from myself as well, what it can look like when someone appears kind of capable and successful on the outside. And yeah, not just appears, they are capable and successful, but underneath, to manage that, they are kind of physically and mentally exhausted. So we'll start with what's visible on the outside, what you see if you don't dig deeply. And then we'll look at the extra unseen effort that it might be taking behind the scenes. We're going to explore the impact of that, both for the individual and the organisation, and why this struggle is so often missed, even by good managers. Okay, it's nothing to do with competency as a manager, it's just sometimes to do with what you know. And then we'll finish with 4 practical shifts, that can help reduce that cost without lowering standards. Because I know that's something that we want to support our neurodivergent employees, but it's not about kind of just allowing them to do less. And most neurodivergent people don't want to do less anyway. It's about keeping those standards, keeping the kind of productivity, but reducing that external cost that they're facing. And as I said, at the end, I'm going to share a link to the slides and a more detailed handout that you can refer to, because I don't think you need me to read everything out. You can kind of read a bit more detail afterwards if you are keen to know that. So when we think about neurodivergent employees who are struggling, we might imagine something quite obvious. So those, missing the deadlines, perhaps, performance concerns, being disorganized, being distracted. And of course, sometimes neurodivergence does present like that in the workplace. But another side of it that I want to show you today is that very often, especially with high-performing neurodivergent staff, that's not what the managers see. What you see is someone who's delivering, all right? They're producing strong work, they're contributing in meetings, they're hitting their deadlines. And quite possibly they're that person that everyone relies on, actually. So there's no obvious red flags, and the assumption is everything must be working. But we need to be mindful of that potential gap between what we see on the surface and what it might be taking underneath to maintain that performance. So before we look at what that unseen effort can involve, I want to make the neurodivergent piece really clear. Why is it relevant? Why does it matter if you're neurodivergent and high performing, or if you're just high performing? Okay. I don't know, those of you that are watching or watching back, what your background are. Some of you, I know you already know a little bit about neurodiversity. Some of you know a lot about it, and maybe it's new to you. So I just want to give a quick bit of context. For neurodivergent people, the role itself at work isn't usually the only demand. Yeah, that work is a demand for everybody. Okay. But when you're neurodivergent, everyday work can end up using more energy when you're managing, and when your brain and your nervous system are also managing things like attention. So it's harder to focus when you're neurodivergent, particularly with ADHD, but also other neurotypes. Distraction, attention, using additional energy to concentrate is a big part of what's happening on a daily basis. There's also sensory input. So most neurodivergent people, this is particularly present with autistic people, but also other neurodivergencies tend to be quite or very sensitive to sensory input. So, for example, if they're working in an office and the kitchen, even if the kitchen's the other end of the office, they're going to be able to smell that lunch. And so, like I say, we can all of us can smell that. But for neurodivergent people, that is even bigger. It's much, much more greater input for them. So it feels almost painful sometimes. The conversations that are going on around them, like the hearing the noises, the music that might be playing, the harsh lighting that can actually hurt the eyes. So they're dealing with all that sensory input as well. Emotional regulation. Now, this is something that doesn't come under diagnostic criteria so much, but is very well understood to be part of ADHD and autism, and even dyslexia and some other neurotypes, sometimes it's because of the additional load of these things that I've just spoken about. Actually, the tolerance level is lower, but also it can affect the brain wiring. So emotional regulation is harder to control. And when you're in the office, when you're being, in a professional environment, you might need to suppress that. And so it's really hard. You might feel quite strong reactions to things, but actually you need to be monitoring yourself all the time. Yeah. So that makes things harder. And then finally, social expectations. This is not finally another example. So like, am I doing the socially accepted way of behaving? Am I making sufficient eye contact? Yeah, am I talking too much or not enough? All of those things are going around in your head while you're in the office still trying to do your job. So I just want to make that really clear, that actually there's all of this happening alongside just doing their job. And I've just seen in the chat someone said the masking. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. That masking, that the mask that you need to put on is not easy. It's an additional effort. So when you're trying to behave professionally, whatever that means, you're putting on this mask that is suppressing a lot of what you're naturally feeling. And particularly for those people who are late diagnosed, or maybe even undiagnosed and not aware, or trying to go through the process, they've probably spent years pushing through things without really understanding why work and social situations feel harder for them than it seems to for other people. Yeah, I can see some nodding. So yeah, so when you've been doing that all of your life, it feels like it's your coping mechanism. That's how I've got to cope. So by the time you as the manager, if that's you, see the high performance, then there's already this extra layer of load underneath it. So that's the context for the unseen effort that we're about to look at. And I just want to make that really clear, so that you can understand that. So How might that unseen effort show up in practice? So you probably do see the hard work that they're putting in. You might see the late nights, and honestly, that should be a red flag in itself, whether it's a neurodivergent employer or not. If you've got someone who's working late nights, there needs to be a conversation there, but that's not for me now. But so you might see how hard they're working, but what you don't see often is the personal cost of producing that level of performance. And I think this is what lots of neurodivergent people would like their higher ups to understand. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples of what that unseen effort might look like. I'm not going to get through them all in detail. Like I said, there's more detail on the handout. So one of the biggest ones that I see all the time in my work, and I definitely struggled / still struggle with, is perfectionistic overcompensation. I'm not sure if I've made that up, but that feels like the phrase that works. So because of being perfectionistic, because of being a perfectionist, you overcompensate. All right. And so this is the person who stays up late, making sure the presentation is perfect. Yeah, I don't want to tell you how many times I went over and over this, and I know there still will be things wrong with it, but who checks the report again and again. Yeah, rewrites the email 5 times before sending it. And it's not because they're not capable, it's not because they can't do it, but the cost of getting it wrong feels so enormous to them because of all the messaging they've had through their whole life. Another thing it might look like is adrenaline-fueled delivery. So, and particularly this applies to ADHDers, but again, it can go across neurotypes as well. A lot of them will have learned to rely on last-minute pressure to get things done. Yeah, and it's the deadline panic is what creates the urgency that they need to start and finish the work. And often what you see is the work is good. Sometimes, it's brilliant. It gets delivered on time. There's no problem, on the end of the delivery side of things. But if the main way that person it gets activated is through stress, that becomes a really expensive way for them to perform, to continue. Now, we mentioned masking already, and self-monitoring, and I think that's probably the most misunderstood. People will say things like, oh, well, when she's in a meeting or when he's with and I saw something on LinkedIn, literally, I think it was this morning, about, oh, when you see the VIPs come in the room, I don't know who they were, but then they can act, they can be who they want to be. So don't tell me that they can't do it. And that's not what anybody's ever saying. It's not that they can't do it, but all the effort that is involved, yeah, in appearing calm and organized and focused and professional, when underneath you're feeling quite overwhelmed or exhausted, that's going to be a problem. You don't want your manager necessarily to know that you're struggling. So putting on that face is a real source of fatigue. So we might be monitoring your tone, thinking about, you've had like, oh, you're quite harsh. So, okay, well, I need to think about how I say that. I just thought I was being honest. So I need to think about my tone of voice. That doesn't come naturally. Yeah. The facial expressions. I know I'd be terrible playing poker. I'm always going to give away what I'm thinking. How much they're talking, whether they're interrupting. That's something I know. I talk a lot. And I'm constantly kind of thinking to myself, oh, am I talking to me? I need to stop. I need to be quiet. Oh, no, now I haven't spoken. Oh, no, I haven't said anything. So I need to speak again. All of that's happening in the background. Yeah. Whether they look engaged enough, the eye contact thing that it seems to be necessary to show that you are actually paying attention. All of that work, it's so draining. I can't kind of explain that enough. Overcommitting and not asking for help, I think that's probably quite straightforward. And again, it's something that we can all be guilty of, but it tends to be more common in neurodivergent people. A bit more detail on this on the handout, but just kind of something to look out for, okay? Not being able to say no and battling through. Let's not see that as a badge of honor. Oh, they're always the one that says yes. They're always the person that I can rely on, and they just get it through. Like, oh, I don't know how you do it. You're so great. Actually, no, that's not something we should necessarily be encouraging. And then all of this inevitably leads to the post-work crash. Okay, so that's when someone holds it together all day, and they get home with absolutely nothing left. The workplace sees the performance, but the rest of their life absorbs the cost. And that's why this matters, because the issue isn't whether the work gets done, it's what it's taking to get it done and how long someone can keep paying that cost. So as I mentioned, the cost doesn't often show up at work first. You don't necessarily see that there. It shows up everywhere else. And of course, the people at work can't see that if you're not showing it to them. but it might be helpful to be aware of what your people might be experiencing outside of work. It might be that they're not sleeping properly. That's quite likely with neurodivergence, actually. A lot of neurodivergent people struggle with sleep. They tend to be on a different kind of, they tend to be, this is a real generalization. It's not always true. They tend to be the late night owls, and they tend to kind of want to sleep in. So if they might eventually get to sleep at 1 a.m., they don't want to be waking up at 6 to get to work, but that's what they have to do because they have to fit in. They might be skipping meals or surviving on junk or cereal. You know, they might stop exercising just because everything is so much. They don't have the time to go to their gym class, or not have the capacity for their downtime or the rest that helps them feel regulated and well. And at the same time, there's often this huge emotional load underneath all of it. So the anxiety and the shame and the self-criticism, this worry about being found out. Imposter syndrome is huge in neurodivergent people. And they're constantly worrying that they're dropping the ball somewhere. And because so much energy is going into holding things together, the relationships feel the strain. Yeah. So partners, children, parents, friends, all of those things can end up having struggles with those. Then you might have less patience, or you might be cancelling plans because of being overwhelmed, not answering messages because of that paralysis that happens, or I haven't spoken with them for a while. So now I don't know how to get back into it. And then you get this cycle of guilt. And when these things start to slip, all of these things that's on the slide here, the actual symptoms can become harder to manage. You know, you need your sleep, you need to eat well, you need your rest, you need kind of to not feel constantly emotionally overwhelmed to be able to operate well. And so you just have to keep pushing harder just to keep up. And then that's the cycle. So over time, it creates this really real risk of burnout. Yeah. So it's not just a work-life balance issue, it is about a sustainability issue. Yeah. Just because we're going at this pace now, can we keep going at that pace? Why it matters to the organisation? Because when this unseen effort goes on for too long, it starts to show up as disengagement or maybe a sudden drop in output, and then that leads to a real burnout risk, as I mentioned. And then you get this sickness absence, or ultimately someone leaving, and the cost involved in replacing someone, recruiting someone and training them up and all of that kind of thing. So even if we're not caring about how well, you know, their well-being, you know, actually we want them to stay, don't we? We don't want to have huge turnovers. Hope you do care about their well-being as well, but from a business perspective, there's a real reason. But usually it's not come from nowhere. Yeah. Even though they seem to be doing really well, there are some signs there. They're just easy to miss because the person was still delivering and probably not asking for help. So let's have a look at that. It's understandable that you might not see what's going on. You know, they're doing really well, so they must be fine. That's a reasonable assumption. But these employees are often very good at masking. So let's be realistic. Disclosure can feel risky. People feel worried about being judged or treated differently or less capable. So they don't necessarily come to their manager and say, look, this is what I'm struggling with and why. All right, so they mask. There's also the possibility that they don't recognize how much they're struggling or that they're neurodivergent yet. So lots of late diagnosed people, I know I certainly did, look back and think, well, I just assumed everyone found things this hard. Yeah. Okay, so it might be helpful to point out some things to look out for. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's lots of other things. It's not true for everyone, but there can sometimes be some early signs that someone's struggling beneath the surface that it might be worth looking out for. So the first one is all or nothing output. So you might see these really intense periods of brilliance, high productivity, lots of ideas, fast turnaround, you know, but then suddenly radio silence. They're not replying to messages, there's delays, there's difficulty getting started again. And this can be cycles of burnout. Burnout isn't always massive crashes. Sometimes it's just little crashes and then you get back on, and then little crashes and then you get back on. Yeah, we don't necessarily see, burnout doesn't have to be 6 months off sick. Okay. I'm just double checking the chat. I think that's just you guys. That's fine. Another one to look out for is new friction. So someone who's usually calm or like, you know, collaborative might seem more irritable or more sensitive to feedback or more defensive. Yeah. And it's usually because they're operating at capacity. They've got to that point where they are absolutely full and they can't take another thing, and it's not that person's fault. It's neither the antagonizer's fault or the neurodivergent person's fault. There's no fault here. It just means that everything has got too much. So if you suddenly see someone, you're like, they're not usually like that, it might be worth just having a little chat with them about what's going on. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about today is social withdrawal. So when you're pulling back from those non-essential chats, or not going to the after work drinks, or going quiet in meetings, disengaging a bit more than usual. Yeah, something to look at, that they might be at this point where they're really struggling. So just be careful not to make assumptions about these things. It doesn't necessarily mean they're neurodivergent, it doesn't necessarily mean they're struggling, but it's just things to notice with curiosity, yeah, and respond to them supportively. So all very well, all of this, but actually probably quite important to know, what can you do differently? All right. Before we I've got 4 practical shifts that I want to talk through. But before we get to that, I want to talk about something that sits underneath all of these strategies and ideas, and that is psychological safety. Hopefully you've all heard of psychological safety, but it's really, really important to be able to make these strategies work, because the strategies themselves are quite simple, but they're only going to work if people feel safe enough to use them. So if they're safe at work, if they feel safe at work, then these strategies are much more likely to work. But if they think that asking for clarity is going to make them look incompetent, they won't ask. If there's those little comments of like, oh, she asks so many questions, then okay, well, I won't. Yeah. If they think that showing a work in progress is going to kind of expose them as not being able to do something perfect first time, then they'll keep doing all that polishing in private, and that keeps adding to the load. If they think that working differently is going to be judged, they'll keep masking. If they think that speaking up when something isn't working is going to be met with resistance, then they're going to keep powering through in a way that doesn't work for their brain. So the foundation is that people need to know they can ask, adapt, and be honest without it being held against them. And that's bigger work than I can talk about in this session, but it's something to be really aware of within your organisation, is what is that psychological safety like. So keeping that foundation in mind, how do we help our neurodivergent colleagues to keep their level of performance but reduce the hidden cost? So let's look at 4 simple shifts. The first one is what I've called clarity over guesswork. So if there's any ambiguity about a task or project, your neurodivergent staff are very likely spending excess energy trying to decode what's expected. So again, I know I feel like I keep hammering the point home, but what you probably see is this excellent work that they're delivering, but the unclear expectations behind the scenes is probably meaning that they are getting there, they're delivering this work because they're overthinking and they're over preparing, and there's a lot of anxiety and perfectionism, all of that hidden mental load. So be specific. What do you actually need? I think this is kind of one of the most straightforward ones. I'm going to come to your question in a second, Sophie.
No problem.
What do you actually need? If you're asking for a piece of work to be done, are we looking for just a quick sense check? Is it a rough draft, or do we want this polished final version? What do I want from you, and when do you need it by? Yeah, it's quite a simple one to do. Then give context. Right? Make sure if you're speaking to someone, this is really, I don't know if you don't experience this, then it's hard to understand. But something to be really careful of is not just dropping in a meeting invite or sending a message that says, "Can we chat?" Okay, let them know what it's about really briefly is fine, but just like, can we have 5 minutes to talk about that client proposal later? Nothing's wrong, I just want your input on the next step. Right, that little extra sentence can save someone so much unnecessary anxiety and mental load. All of that rumination and panic about what the talk might be about, you can end up taking yourself down the point that you're going to get fired. Right. And it might seem odd to you, like I said, if it's not the way your brain operates, but it is much more common than you think. And it's so easily redressed. Just that extra little sentence, what it's about. And also in terms of context, it does help to know why. If you're giving someone some work to do, why are we doing this? What's the relevance of this? Why is it important? It's really going to help neurodivergent brains to engage better. Yeah. And then clarifying priorities. Prioritizing is something that can sometimes be challenging for people with neurodiversity. Yeah, Sophie.
Yeah, do you know, obviously, I know young people obviously have EHCPs now. Obviously, I don't know whether this is just new to me because I am quite young, to be fair. Do you know within the workplace, like, do they actually have like something like that for us or not? Because I don't think they are. I've never actually like questioned it or heard about it. So, do they actually have them for us? Because again, obviously, with young people being young, going to school, college, etc., like, okay, that's fine. But then what about us adults as we obviously hit
Yeah.
25? Where's that bracket of support within the
Yeah.
workplace for our needs for our plan?
Yeah. So an EHCP is a legal document just for anyone who I've got children in the system. If you don't have
Yeah,
that, you might not know, but it's a legal document to show what support is needed to help them to not just manage but thrive and everything else
yeah,
in the school or educational setting. There isn't a legal thing that needs to be put in place. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and this isn't about this today. But in terms of, I think what you're bringing up is really important. That I think there should be. I think it's really good
yeah,
practice to have some kind of plan. With if you have a neurodivergent employee, if you know that when you hire them or when at some point it kind of gets disclosed to you, I think having some kind of like passport like of this is what helps me, these are my strengths, this is what I'm good at, this is what I struggle with, this is what I could do with some extra support on, this is how I work best, those kind of things I think
yeah,
really good practice. That's not for today's talk, but I will happily give you
yeah.
the
I was
talk on
like, it
that, but
kind of like it was just
yeah,
in my mind. So I was like,
yeah.
oh, do we actually have these?
And I know what you mean. I think for young people that have had that support and then they suddenly it gets dropped and then they're in the workplace and they have to kind of fend for themselves,
Yeah,
that's really, really tricky. But that's where I think that's where the organization, that's what you need to look for is and I can't remember the stats
yeah.
are terrible, but there was a report recently about it's such a huge number, it's like 80% or something of Gen Zers when they look for where they want to work they're more likely to work, even if they're not neurodivergent themselves, they're more likely to work at a company that has got like neuro-inclusive practices. So
Ah,
it's really good to do that anyway. All for so many reasons. Oh, there's an HR person in the chat,
thank you.
Sarah. So yeah, so the Equality Act, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's loads of things there. I'm going to just move on from that at the moment. So if you have a look at what Sarah's put in the chat there, but yeah, so yeah, there isn't a legal responsibility to have a type of one-to-one support document. But yeah, absolutely, it is protected under the Equality Act 2010. So yeah, definitely speak to HR. All right, thank you. So just coming back to this, so where was I on prioritizing? I think, yeah. So sometimes people struggle with prioritizing. So if you're balancing lots of different tasks or projects that are competing for your time, then it can reduce unnecessary mental load by being explicit about priorities. Yeah. Otherwise, what's happening is they're trying to constantly work out what matters most, what needs to happen first. Yeah, which uses up a lot of that executive function. So try and help them with that if possible. Like if you're dumping a load of stuff on them, say, I know I've given you lots of things. Can we get this one done first? That one, if you get the other things done, that's the least important. If you know, tell them. Don't let them sit and work it out. And then defining what done looks like where possible. Yeah. Because if someone doesn't know what good enough looks like, then they're quite likely to keep going long after the work is already good enough. All right. And I know this can feel a bit like spoon feeding people, but it's not. It's not about that. It's just about reducing that unnecessary cognitive load. That as the manager, as the person that's sort of, the people leader, you've probably thought about those things. You know what they want them to do first. You know how you want them to do it. And it's not, like I said, it's not about micromanaging. But if you already know, just say it. Just get that out there and then make it easy and take that away. Okay. Sarah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but as fellow ADHD, it's hard not to ask questions. I was really interested there with your last comment about micromanaging. And
Yeah.
when I was working in corporate, I had multiple different managers. Some were great, some were not. Similar to you, didn't know I had ADHD at the time. Um, one of my managers tried really hard with all of these things.
Mm.
Um, we would do little mini accountability sessions. We would look at setting fake deadlines to an extent. It was on paper the right thing to do, but in practice, I felt like I was being micromanaged. and it
Yeah.
really negatively impacted the relationship between me and that manager. I don't know if you've come across that or you've got any tips for how a manager can do it in a way to not cause that kind of feeling of me against them that I
Yeah.
kind of ended up with.
I see what you're saying, and yeah, thank you for bringing that up. But it is really important because it sounds like a simple thing to do that, but then actually, there's all sorts of different responses to that. I don't want to go into it great, but that you have there's an element often with neurodivergence of demand avoidance as well. And yeah, and that sort of feeling micromanaged is hard. So as a manager, you feel like you're doing all the right things, but then the other person is feeling like, suffocated or like you don't trust them or that kind of thing. Ultimately, I, ultimately, I think it comes down to the relationship that you have with that person. So that's why that psychological safety thing underlies it. So if they can say, if you know, and I would like, I'm pausing because I'm thinking whether to, I do want to ask you as well. I'm thinking what order to do this in. But I guess if I was to sort of hand that back to you, if you back in that situation, did you feel comfortable saying, I feel micromanaged?
No,
Mm.
I didn't. And however, it was maybe 6 months after my diagnosis. So everything was also quite new to me in terms of realizing that it wasn't just I'm
Yeah.
a weird person, but there's something going on. So I was struggling with that, and she had never managed anyone with a neurodiversion. I'm not sure that's the right term
Yeah.
before. So she had a lack of understanding, I guess. So the combination of those two made it really tricky.
Yeah, so you're both kind of learning together. And this is something else, isn't it? Like, you can have the best intentions and you like this is a different talk that I do, but you can how to sort of support your neurodivergent employees in general. People will say, "Oh, what do you need?" And actually, especially if it's something that's new to you, you're like, well, I don't know what I need. I just know that I find this hard. And so there is a bit of a dance. And I think there's a bit of, like from both sides, there needs to be an understanding that it's never, well, not never, but it's unlikely to be perfect. Even if you've managed a lot of neurodivergent people before, you haven't managed Sarah and Sarah's particular type of neurodivergence. So it is about, as ultimately, I think it is about having that relationship where you can both talk to each other and both discuss your frustrations, and your intentions and all of that kind of thing. I don't know if anyone's got any other thoughts on that. Oh, so Erin has just said there, I've been in this situation recently, and what we did was
So
uh,
just the
go on.
nutshell of it is that I also had a diagnosis last year, actually. So went through a process of trying to work out how to work better, and with my manager, who thankfully was provided a lot of psychological safety. We went through a process of testing different approaches. And
Yeah.
so what we designed for me worked quite well because it was sort of building on the things that I already instinctively used, but also I knew I needed more of. So sort of like a flexibility around check-ins. So like we had the deadline, but my manager would sort of make a little slot in her diary available if there was anything that I needed to clarify or check in,
Mm.
whether I was going in the right direction or, course correct if I wasn't, and just get feedback. So it was a bit more of a partnership than, and at the beginning it did feel a bit kind of a bit spoon-fed.
Yeah.
But over time, it's really worked for me. And I'm moving jobs now, and I'm going to take a lot of what I've learnt, so much of what I've
Mm.
learnt to the next thing. Quite nervous that I won't have the same support
Yeah.
and psychological safety, but you know,
Yeah.
we'll work on what we
Yeah.
know works for me, hopefully.
That's amazing. I'm so pleased for you. And I think like yeah, absolutely there'll be nerves, but having that kind of model that you can kind of take with you and go like, this is what worked. then
Yeah.
then I imagine your future line manager will be like, brilliant. You know, we kind of, we're not starting from scratch again, are we? But yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be different because you're in a different environment and that kind of thing. But what
Yeah.
I'm hearing from what you said there is this kind of co-creation of the strategies was really important in the first place, and then also that kind of almost constant tweaking and monitoring, and oh, this was what we need it a bit more like this. So it's an ongoing process, isn't it? And things
Yeah.
change, you know, as time goes on, and new people join the team and things. So it's never going to be like a one and done. Like, you know, we're speaking about this document. You're not going to kind of put it in, this is how I want to work, and this is how it's going to be forevermore. It's a regular thing.
Mm.
Okay,
Yeah.
brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing those. I think that's really, really important. My next slide is actually about what you were just talking about the check-ins. So I think, well, hopefully it will agree with what you've said. So I'm saying this, I'm sort of segueing from the last side of what I just said about that whole micromanaging thing. This is something we do need to be really careful about. Yeah. So the important word here is agreed. All right. And exactly as you've just said to me, I know it's about co-creating it together. Yeah. So let me read through this, and then we'll see the connection to what we've just talked about. So this is especially relevant for your high performers, because what the line managers will probably see is just that finished output, yeah, and the work that gets done. And that's what, you know, at work, in a profit-making organization particularly, that's the important bit, isn't it? The work that gets done, the standards high, clients happy, whatever, you know, from the outside, everything looks good. And people are not questioning the process. All right. But behind the scenes, as I've said, you've got all of this extra additional load. All right. And that last minute panic, particularly, is what I'm talking about on this slide here. So if we build in these agreed checkpoints, and however that may be, whether that is, like you said, just a little space in the diary that we can, you know, you can use, it's available to you, whether that needs to be a bit heavier at the start. Yeah, there's going to be a bit of a balance trying to find what works for you, but creating that together, how that is. But it's going to give both the employee and the manager that earlier visibility. Yeah, so it might be that you kind of say, well, let's see a rough outline by Tuesday. Let's just check in with that to make sure that small progress is happening. It's not being left till the last minute, or a midpoint conversation. You know, so it doesn't need to be rigid. We can have some flexibility in there. But just kind of, if you realize that there's a longer term project, that's something that neurodivergent brains tend to struggle with, is that time blindness. Let's just kind of get some little agreed check-ins, that you know, predictable points, where you can ask questions or sense check direction or that kind of thing, or get support before it all gets urgent. Yeah. But like I said, being really careful. We're not talking about surprising people with these constant check-ins or hovering over them. You don't want to increase the pressure or micromanage. Yeah. So it's just a way to try and reduce that the reliance on the adrenaline and the deadline panic to deliver it, and by having these agreed check-ins that are not just, you know, are you doing it, but also, but well, not just also, but instead, what support do you need? How are we getting on? Is there anything I can do to help with that? Yeah. So reducing that hidden cost again, like I said, and reducing that reliance, which is the cost. Does that fit in with with your sort of experience of it? Yeah, fab. Okay, I'm glad. Thank you. You introduced that topic nicely for me, so that was it. Nice one. I'm nearly. I know we're sort of over time, but I'm nearly done. We've just got these two to get through, which are shorter ones. But this third one is about outcome over process. And again, this talk is about the high performing neurodivergent. We're not talking about those ones that are really, really struggling. They're doing well, they're producing good work, but it's, you know, they're doing it in a process that's much more effortful than it needs to be. So the question that the managers need to ask is, are we clear on the result we need while allowing enough flexibility in how someone gets there? Yeah. Sometimes the process does matter. There might be genuine business reasons or safety or legal reasons why something needs to happen in a particular way. But often, oh, sorry, I've lost that too quickly. Often the process is much more flexible than we realise. Yeah. So we need to be careful not to default to, well, it's just the way we do things here. Does someone need to work through a task in a particular order? Do they need to be at their desk, you know, for a particular amount of hours a day to do their thinking? Are they allowed to go off for walks to do their ideation, you know? Do they need to respond verbally in meetings? I've got my last slide is about meetings, so I'm going to go into that more. But, you know, or can they actually send their input in a more considered, sort of thoughtful way afterwards when they've had a chance to process it? Do they need to use the same system as everyone else, basically? Or is it the outcome what really matters? And I hope really it's the outcome that's important here. And for neurodivergent people that are trying to work in that expected way, it's just, again, it's using up this energy, and it's just that battery is getting lower and lower. Doing all of the masking and self-monitoring and forcing themselves through methods that don't suit their brain means they're not going to have any extra capacity for anything else. All right. So not about removing structure completely, because structure can be very helpful. But it's just about being clear on the outcome and then building in enough flexibility around the process so that the person can deliver without using all that extra energy. And then the final one that is quite specific, but I think it's really important because it's something that comes up a lot. And I think meetings are something that a lot of people hate and get annoyed at. But it can be a real huge additional load for neurodivergent people. Yeah. They might look engaged and professional, but as well as processing all that information that's coming from different sort of people in the same way that everyone else is, they're also working out when to speak. They're managing the distractions. They're dealing with working memory issues, like when someone said something a bit like how, you know, oh, I need to say this now because otherwise I'm going to forget it. And if someone comes to you and asks you something about what someone said 3 people ago, I'm lost there. All of that is extra load. So I know I'm kind of hammering home this point, but just so that people realize all of that's going on. And that additional effort is not seen, right? So we need to be really like clear about meetings being this potential source of invisible load. So we might need to be clearer about the purpose of the meeting. I think, you know, literally, I think all of this is important for everybody, not just neurodivergent people. I think if we make the workplace better for neurodivergent people, we make it better for everybody. And I think meetings is a real good example of this. Yeah. What is the purpose of the meeting? Are we making a decision? Like, do we need to go away from this having made a decision? Are we just sharing information? Are we generating ideas? Are we, you know, getting together so that we can invite input? What's the purpose of it? And then also like context, you know, in terms of an agenda, as much as you can, an agenda in advance. Don't have people coming in cold and having to sort of start that processing from that moment they've walked in the room. What are we going to be talking about so they can kind of already have a bit of an idea in mind? And then different ways to contribute, yeah? Maybe some people might want to give their written input before the meeting because they struggle verbally, and often that's to do with working memory. I know that I've got a really good point about this particular project that we're coming to discuss, but if I have to say it out loud, I'm going to struggle with that. Can I send it in writing to someone first? Or is it okay if I read it off my notes? I have a list of notes here and I read it. So what? You know, is it professional to have it in your, you know, that's how we see things are, but can we engage differently? Yeah. So yeah, so rather than assuming that the best contribution always happens verbally and in the moment, what other options are there? Yeah. And then finally, they're reducing that avoidable pressure in a live discussion. Yeah. So let's not assume that the immediate responses are the better responses. Yeah. Or that, you know, if we're talking about Zoom meetings, camera on, regular verbal communication, you know, immediate answers, they're the only signs of engagement. They're not. Other people are processing them slowly, and sometimes your best people are doing the slow processing, the thoughtful responses. So we're looking for ways to make it easier for people to contribute well without having to spend so much energy performing engagement, right, in the expected way. Okay, I know we're over the time, but let's quickly run through these. So in summary, what I hope you're taking away from today are these key points. High performance can hide extreme effort. So just because they appear to be coping doesn't mean that process is sustainable. Masking can make burnout invisible. So only, you know, the signs only often become visible once they're already overwhelmed or struggling. Ignoring the cost creates risk. So not just for the well-being of the individual, but also for retention, engagement, long-term performance, absence, all of that within organisations too. And some of the things that help support sustainable performance are clarity, agreed checkpoints, autonomy in the how, and lower unnecessary meeting load. So supporting people without micromanaging them. All right. So the goal isn't to lower the standards, it's to maintain high quality output while reducing the unnecessary cost it takes for people to get there. So if there's one final thought I'd like to leave you with, is this: sustainable performance means looking beyond output. Okay. I hope that's been helpful. There are some resources here. As I said, if you're on a phone, you can screenshot this and you can put it in, or you can just type in the thing, so you can get all of the slides, the more detailed guide, what did I call it, companion guide, with all the key points from today, and the replay that will be sent to you. So if you're already on my email list, if you've already signed up to this, then you'll get that. If not, put this in. Because obviously there's a lot more I'd have loved to have included today, but I didn't have the time. And as a self-confessed perfectionistic overcompensator, that's the way I'm managing it. So yeah, my contact details are on there as well. If you're not already connected to me, please do. If you want to email me any questions, feel free. Has anyone got any questions before we finish up? If anyone's got any questions but they don't want it on the recording, then I'll stop recording and we can do
Just
that.
to say, all of that was really relevant and on point. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, same. Just a massive thank you. I think there needs to be more of this in the workplace. If this had been in place for me 5, 6 years ago, it would have been much more supportive than the journey that I had to go through.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? Like you shouldn't have had to go through that, and hopefully things are changing a bit now.
Yeah.
Thank you for your feedback. No worries, Caitlin. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to stop the recording now.